Hey, this is John again with Washam Development, and in this video today I wanted to do an overview, kind of a tutorial over the Facebook API, the SDK as it's used with JavaScript. And there are a lot of really cool things you can do with it. I love JavaScript. I love what it can do in the browser, and how awesome it can make your apps, and being able to interact with their API, and a lot of cool stuff. So I wanted to just go over how to get started with it, because I know that can often be something that stops people from using a cool tool like this, is just getting off the ground. And so I wanted to go ahead and go over how to get this, get it up and started. So one of the first things we have to do to be able to test, to be able to just get this tutorial off the ground, is we'll go here to our app settings. I'm going to assume that you have already created an app in Facebook. You can do that from developers.facebook.com and get your app created. You'll want to take note of your app ID here at the top, and there's just some basic information to fill out here. But under the basic settings, something very important we got to do here to start out is you'll want to set your site URL to, and you want to go ahead and do HTTPS, but set it to localhost. Once you do that, we can then go up here to app domains and type in localhost and set that to localhost, and then save your changes. And what that's going to allow us to do is to be able to test our app just on our local computer, and that will allow our local computer to be able to communicate with Facebook and use the features of the Facebook SDK API. So that's the first step to do here. So another thing we can just discuss is this URL right here. I'll put all this information in the blog post. This right here is a great place to start to read what Facebook has to say about getting up and started using their SDK. So feel free to read through here, and you'll get some additional information just to get started. So probably one of the easiest ways to get a project set up and running, I've got Visual Studio here. So one of the easiest ways to just get a very basic project set up on your own local computer would, I'm just going to use Visual Studio here. It's what I have on hand. You can do a new file, new project. We're just going to have this be a blank solution. So this is going to be the Facebook SDK demo, and that's going to create it in this directory right here. So this will be completely blank by default. We can add, let's do an existing website. So we're just going to act like it's got some files already existing, and we're going to use that folder right here. So here we go. We've now got our little project already ready to go, and so we're going to go ahead and add a new item, which would be an HTML page. We'll just call this the SDK page. Okay, so now remember we discussed wanting to have this be HTTPS, and you can do that. So if you don't have the properties open already, you can right click properties window, and here we go, SSL enabled. Let's turn that to true, and that is going to give us a URL that we can access that will access our content locally on our computer, but do it via HTTPS. So we can go ahead and open this up. Yes, let's run without debugging. Okay, so that's fine. Let's go ahead and go to this URL. Okay, and we can't access the index page. There is no index page yet, so we called our page the SDK.html, and there we go. So now we've accessed our page locally. Let's go back here, and we'll just give it a name, SDK demo. Give it a nice H1 tag here. Go back to our site, and now we can see that it is actually loading live. Okay, so we got our project set up. We're ready to start testing. So let's start off with the very basic, the very first thing that we have to get onto our page, and that is the JavaScript code that Facebook gives to us to load the SDK via JavaScript onto our website. So let's go ahead and start with our script tag. And I want to just talk briefly about this code and what it does. These are pretty awesome. You may already be familiar with how these work, but I just think that they're really cool. It's actually very strange, the syntax that you're able to use with JavaScript here, but you can see we're actually creating this function, or they are creating this function, and then immediately calling it and passing in these arguments here. And so you can see that D maps to document, S to the string script, and then the ID that they're giving is Facebook JS SDK. So here they are actually, so on the document, get elements, so it's getting all script tags and then returning the first one here. Then the next thing it's doing is it's get element by ID, and so it's going to use this ID here that maps to here. And if that ID already exists on your page, it's going to return. So in other words, if the API or the SDK has already been loaded, this is just going to return. So if you accidentally included this code right here twice or more times, it would keep hitting this each additional time and would not continue loading it multiple times. So that's great to have. If it gets past this line, it will then create the script tag, give it an ID. Here's the URL to actually load the SDK, and then it inserts it before the first script tag that's on the page. And that's it. So that's going to now load up the SDK and have it available on your website. So the next natural question would be, okay, so now how do I know when that has actually loaded so that I can actually do something with it? Great question. After this SDK has loaded, what it does is it looks for a global function that's attached to the window object on your site, and it's going to look for FB.asyncInit. So window.fbAsyncInit, and we're going to define a function here, and so this function is going to be called after the SDK has successfully loaded. Another thing of note here, let's just go ahead and up here, we're going to go ahead and put in some buttons so that we can test out some functionality here. So let's just create this section, and we're going to have some multiple buttons that we can put in here, so like maybe a share button or something. So let's go ahead and start with a share button. So this is really cool. You can just create any kind of button or an image or anything on your page, and if the user clicks on that, it will open up the share dialog in a pop-up window that would allow the user to share that content from your site to Facebook, and they can define who that is visible to, like their privacy settings and that sort of thing. We can do that very easily. So let's just start out with that. We'll call this our share button. Now, one thing I want to note, like let's go back here. Another thing you'll have to do is when you get to your page here, you can either hit the F12 key on your keyboard or right click and inspect. That will open up developer tools. We are really going to want to have this open because we're going to be using the console a lot here to see what is being passed to and from the API. So let's just go ahead. What we've done up to now is we have the code running, we have this init, and then we have this share button. Let's go ahead and we want to add in an event listener for that button. So document.get element by ID. I'm going to get this right here, and we're going to say on, sorry, that's jQuery syntax. Add event listener, click, and we're going to have to actually pass in a callback function. So this is what would be called when this button gets clicked. So we're going to go ahead and use this sample function that Facebook gives us. So we're going to call FB.ui there are going to be quite a few different methods you can pass in here. We'll discuss that in a little bit. What link that you're wanting to share. So that's all going to happen when someone clicks on that share button. So if we go back here, we'll notice that there's this button, but nothing has happened yet. And that is because there's a very important step here. That is, you actually have to init or initialize your app with Facebook first. That has to be done. So that is done here. Once the Facebook SDK loads, we need to call this FB is a global object that is available. You can call different functions that are attached to it. So let's call init, and what we need to pass in is an object with multiple properties. One of the most important is passing in your app ID. Let me get mine. So now we've got our app ID. Let me just go ahead and use the sample that Facebook gives, and they've got some nice little comments here to describe what each one of these does. Some of these you probably won't actually even need, but there's just some documentation there if you actually need to do that. 3.2 is the most recent version as of right now. So, alright, so what this means is on my page I am now going to have initialized my app to where any calls that I make, like for instance the share, is going to be tied to my app. Your app is where permissions are defined on what you're allowed to do and how you're allowed to interact with the user. So now if we come back here and refresh our page, so now we're going to have this, and this is going to pop up this dialog that allows us to share whatever URL that you gave it. If you wanted to include, like let's say you wanted to share whatever page the user is on at the time, you just want to share that link, you could just come back here and do window.location.href. So that's going to be whatever link the user is currently on right now. Go ahead and share that. And so yeah, it's going to be an error because it's a local host link, but you get the idea of being able to do that. So there are other buttons that you can do here, like you can do a like, so that would be as if the person was liking this page or something like that. You can also do a send, where Facebook would open a dialog to have the user send this page to someone else. So let's go ahead and we got to get these rigged up just like the other one. So I've got these code snippets here. Let's just go ahead and put these in. So for the like button, in this case it's called share open graph. That's the method. It's going to be a like, and then this has some properties that you pass in. In this case the object will be a link, a URL that the user would like. The second argument that we're passing in here is actually a callback. So once that dialog opens up and the user does something with it, it will then call this function right here afterward. In this case we're just saying log to the console whatever Facebook sends back in that. Same thing with the send button. It's going to use the send method to send this link, and then we'll just go ahead and see what that shows us here. So now we've got a share button. Sorry, I should have changed that to like. That's so you can see here, likes a link. That would post to the Facebook page. Now note here, undefined, the response that Facebook sends back when you just cancel it is undefined. Just for kicks and giggles, so this is set to only me, so I'm going to go ahead and like this. When I post to Facebook, it's going to pass me back an empty array. So you actually can detect that in your code if you want to, that if the response they send back is undefined, you know that the user did not actually do anything. They didn't like, they didn't actually share. But if you get back anything that's not defined, in this case just an empty array, then you know that the user did post something or share something. so you're able to detect that if you need to. So here's their little send dialog. So who do you want to send it to, what message, and that sort of thing. So note that these are things, these are ways that you can interact with Facebook, and you don't even have to have the user log in or do anything crazy. You've just got to get the basic SDK logged in, initialized with your app that you've got, and then you can start creating these buttons and using this code. Very, very simple to share content, like content, send content. There are actually a bunch more actions that we can look at here. So let's find this link again. So here's where the list of dialogues that you can use with the API. A whole bunch of stuff that I obviously won't get into here, but if you're interested in learning more about what you can do with the SDK, even without logging in, you can do that right there. So now let's talk about logging into Facebook, allowing a user to log into Facebook with your app, and then be able to do things with that login on your website. There's a couple different ways, at least, that you can log in to your Facebook app. You could do it so whenever the Facebook API or the SDK loads, you could actually do it inside of here to check the login status if the user has already logged into your app or not. You could go ahead and do that inside of here. So this is immediately, whenever the SDK loads, it's going to call this function right here to see if the user's already logged in or not. Notice that it's going to be calling this function right here, so that function has to be defined. So we can, let's go ahead and do that right up here above. So status change callback. It's going to be receiving an argument that is the response. So for the time being, let's just put in a couple, let's just log a couple things to the console. So this is going to give us the response, and then we just know that it actually got to here first. Another thing that is can be very helpful is let's put in a status here, as a little status box that will we can log things to that to be able to just see it on the screen where we are in the code. So let's just go ahead and run that right there. So after the login status has been checked, it's going to call this function right here, pass in there, give us a response. We're going to pass that to our function here, and then we're going to log it out. So let's go back to this, and immediately it went out and checked, is this user logged in or not? And in this case, because I have actually authorized I have actually connected previously, you can see here that I am connected, and that's what we want to see. It also gives you an authorization response, where it gives you information like an access token. That's very important if you're needing to pass that around to get information about the user. That you can note that, and your user ID, if you're needing to see what their ID is, that sort of thing, you'll get that back as well. Okay, so let's say that you have already signed into your app and you actually want to get unsigned into your app. You want to remove permissions, and you'll probably be doing this often as you test out your login paradigm on your site. You want to go back and act as if you have never logged in before. So what you can do is go into your Facebook settings. So it's facebook.com/settings, and tab equals application. So here's going to be a list of all applications you've signed into. Here's mine, and you open that up, remove app. I'll just go ahead and select that. I don't think I posted anything. Actually, I did that one. Remove, and there we go. So now when we come back here, we are checking for login status, and here you can immediately see status not authorized. So now you know that the user is not logged in on your site, and you would be able to do something with that. So we're going to take another basic call that a code sample that Facebook gives us. So after we have looked at the response here, logged that to the console. So what we're going to do is, if the response status is connected, and we saw that just a minute ago, we're going to go ahead and put in our little status block up here that we are connected. And then I've just taken a very basic call to get user data for the current logged in user. So how you do that is you call FB.api, and here there's a ton of things you could pass in, but for right now we're just going to do /me, and that's Facebook is going to know that we're requesting information about the user who has logged in. After that call is successful, it's going to pass back, we're giving it this callback function. It's going to give us the response, and we're going to go ahead and log to the console. You could do it to your status as well, it doesn't really matter. Successful login for, and we're going to get the name of the user and that sort of thing. Now, before we just go out and test that, if the user is not connected, which like right now we're not authorized, then we're just going to put in this status block, please log into the app, because they're not logged in. We know that. What we can also do is, if they're not logged in, we do want to log them in. So we can call Facebook FB.login, and then once that is done, so that's going to open up a dialog to request the user to log in, and after they have done something with that dialog, this is going to be called. They're going to give us a response to tell us what happened, and we'll log that out. The second argument we're passing in here is actually an object, and in this case this is what scopes you are requesting from the user. By default it's just name and profile picture, but in this case I'm also requesting their email address. There are a bunch of other permissions that you can request. Let's go look at those real quick just so you can see. As you can see, there are a lot of additional permissions you can request here. So another one, we could do like user likes. Put that in there. Now do note that any of these additional permissions, I think most of the permissions that you would request require approval by Facebook. So you would have to have an app review done. So if you go into your app review of your app and look at your permissions and features, you'll see here that the majority of them require additional review. So like I had just put in user likes, so here you can see that this is going to require additional setup. You have to actually request it. You have to do a screen recording and show how you're going to use it. Some additional stuff like that. So you're just going to have to keep note of that if you're wanting to use those. Okay, so we've got all that set up. We're going to request that. I also have this return scopes in just so I can see, because after they open up the dialog, they can actually deselect certain scopes. So they could actually deselect user likes, and I wouldn't know that except if I have it returned in the response, and I'm able to look at that and see what scopes that they actually gave me. So let's go back here, go ahead and refresh this. Okay, now another thing you'll note here, the pop-up got blocked. That is because there was no user interaction on my website that opened up that Facebook login. So let's go back to our code, and you can see here that we are just going ahead and it's trying to get the login status. It goes to here. If they're not connected, it just tries to open up this Facebook login, but this wasn't initiated by the user. The user didn't click on something to have this Facebook login have a pop-up open up, and so the browsers by default will block that pop-up. So this may not be best for your website. Probably the best thing would be to have some sort of button to log in to Facebook. So what we can do is just, if you want to have like a, let's have a new section here. and we're going to put in a custom login button here. Let's just call that. Okay, so we now have this button here, and we're going to have to again do another event listener, or if you're using jQuery, do on click. Okay, so add event listener for a click, and at this point then you can call the Facebook.login and do the same kind of thing here. And so at this point, when you click on this button, it's going to be a user initiated click, which will, the browsers will say, okay, yep, let this click go through. It's going to open a pop-up. That's okay because the user actually clicked on something, and that will allow it to open up. So let's just go ahead and run through that so we can see that it is now going to open up this pop-up. You can see here, this is that warning about you haven't done the app review yet for user likes, which was one of the permissions that I requested. So that's okay, you'd have to do that before you launch this live on your website. So the name of your app will receive this. This is what I was talking about, is the user can actually turn that off. And so that's something you just have to keep in mind. So once I hit continue, it's going to go ahead and run whatever function that I have inside of here. So let's see, let's go ahead and we'll look at this real quick. We're going to do another call to the API. We're going to say me, so that's the user that logged into your app. Let's get their likes. In this case, I'm going to request the following fields. The ID of whatever the like is, it could be a page or a photo album or something like that. What's the name of it? What is the about? These would be things like for pages. What time that the user actually liked that thing, and then the category that it falls within. So those are things, if you just want to see what the user was interested in, or if you use that to see what other similar things that they could be interested in. Of course, lots of ways you could use that. And then what are we going to do with that? Well, let's just log it to the console so that we can see it. So that's what's going to happen after we go ahead and click continue here. So let's go ahead and continue. You'll see that the custom login is now complete. We had that logging to the console. We see our authorization response coming back here that we are now successfully connected. You'll notice here, granted scopes. So we're now able to see what the user authorized us to use for them. And so that's that response that came back, and here we go. We now have data coming back from the API. These are the pages that the user has already liked. So you can see here, this is the ID of a page, the name of it, the about us, or the about information, what category it falls within, and when that page was actually liked. So very, very cool what you're able to do there. I'll just note that Facebook actually has some some really nice looking Facebook login buttons that they support with some specific HTML that you can implement on your site. So this right here, they have this interesting HTML that they set up here, FB login button, and then you can actually pass in some attributes right here. So size large, what scopes are you wanting to request? Do you want to return the scopes? On login, you're going to tell it to run some specific function on your site. And the same here, there's another custom button syntax that you can use. I'm not really going to go into that because it's there's a little bit more setup to do with that. And you can see that it started out, it was actually just flat HTML, and it's not until the Facebook SDK actually loads when it's actually going to scan the HTML of your site and look for any HTML element that has this syntax right here. And so it did that, it went through and looked and replaced it, and so it's actually going to, yeah, I didn't actually have, so this is actually a different function that would have to be called here. But that's okay, you get the point. That's what would be called after this button is clicked. So that's just another thing you can use if you want to be able to log into your app. So I think that is the majority of that. At least gets you started. Being able to log into your app, check the statuses of what's going on, what information is Facebook passing back to you. Even if you're not logging in, the fact that you can put in the share and like buttons, send it to the user's friends. Very, very cool what you're able to accomplish here with the Facebook SDK. So if you have any specific questions about the SDK, how to use it, please feel free to comment below. I'd love to help discuss, love to help people. So feel free to comment and post. Go check out the blog post where I'll have a lot of these code samples and some description there. So I hope this was helpful for you, and I'll see you next time.